All right, so it's a few minutes past. Let's get started. My name is Marc Jeuland. I'm an associate professor of public policy and global health here at Duke University. Welcoming you to this Duke-UNICEF Forum on Social Innovation, and particularly to the session that we'll be having today, an interesting session on this nexus of climate change and water, sanitation, and hygiene. So we have a set of 4 panelists who will be participating and sharing their experiences on this particular topic. The first is Zeal Desai. She is a co-founder of Green Periods. Then we also have Mustika Wijaya, who is a co-founder and executive director of Solar Chapter. We have Elvis Cow, who's joining us from MIT and co-founder of C2X. And then last but not least, Bisi Agberemi, who is a WASH specialist at UNICEF. By way of introduction and just some opening framing remarks, we are going to be talking about this nexus of climate change and WASH. And specifically, we all know that climate change represents one of the most significant global challenges of the 21st century, a massive societal challenge that requires coordination of many different actors and institutions and governments, and where progress has been slow, to say the least. As a result of that slow progress, we're starting to feel some of the severe impacts that climate change will impose on the world. And some of these impacts also encompass risks to water and sanitation services, which we'll be talking about today. Not surprisingly, a lot of those impacts are borne particularly by the poor in low-income countries and contexts. And so I think we'll be hearing a lot about that in particular. When we talk about climate change and links to water resources, it's not always the first link that people think about, but it's really about connections in terms of precipitation and the reliability of precipitation, rising temperatures, which lead to greater evaporative losses and growing water scarcity potentially, and of course, higher demands for water in a hotter climate, which further stress these resources. There's also the possibility of severe and extreme events. And so floods and extreme events pose major sanitation challenges because of the possibility for environmental contamination, which exposes many people to a range of waterborne illnesses. Obviously, there are solutions that can help create more resilient water and sanitation systems. And those are solutions that largely try to provide more clean water and more affordable clean water to populations that help protect against these extreme events and make technologies and services resilient to those impacts. And so in this panel, I think we'll be hearing about many of those things. I'm going to try to keep my comments to a minimum because I think we have these 4 really great, interesting panelists that we'll hear from. But I'll facilitate and ask some questions, and then I encourage you all to also drop your own questions into the Q&A, where we'll be monitoring and answering questions as we move along. So with that, maybe I'll ask the first question, and then I'll kind of walk through the panel. And this first question is just kind of an icebreaker. I'd like to know from the panelists what they perceive as the greatest threats to water and sanitation and hygiene because of climate change. And to the extent that some of those threats are already being felt, you can comment on that as well. Or if you think that these threats, these major threats are going to be coming and that we need to prepare for them, you can comment on that as well. So we'll start with Zeal. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Just to give a very brief introduction about who I am and what we do. I'm the co-founder of Green Periods. We're an initiative on sustainable menstruation and based out of Austin, Texas. we are trying to tackle a couple of different problems here. So we have the economic, ecological, and health impacts of menstruation that we don't normally think about. So I did some math. One fine day was menstrual hygiene day, and I realized a shocking revelation. 2 pounds of waste that I had generated over a use of a lifetime of reusable product versus somebody else for a lifetime of 40 years, we menstruate for 40 years. And they are spending around $2,000 and also generating 250 pounds of waste. So 2 pounds versus 250 pounds, and then $200 on reusables versus $2,000 on disposables. So this was pretty shocking. And I thought that this kind of awareness should be more available. Also, education regarding sustainable menstruation is very lacking. So I decided to tackle this problem with my co-founder. And what we're trying to do is via educational tools like a menstrual footprint calculator that we have devised and outreach, we're trying to shed light on this topic. So to answer your question, Professor Jeuland, I think that when it comes to WASH and menstruation in general, period poverty would be a big topic of importance here, because 500 million menstruators are without access to menstrual products globally. And this number is only likely to increase with climate change and exacerbation of displacement and other related problems. So we're seeing that extreme weather is leading to supply chain disruption and displacement. A good example of that was the pandemic itself, when we saw a lot of deprivation and stigma around access to menstrual products in general. There was price gouging. So reliance on single-use products, which is pretty heavy at this point in time, it is generating a lot of recurring costs and waste for already disadvantaged populations, like you were mentioning earlier, Professor. And this is just really unfairly bearing the brunt of climate change for the people who are the most disadvantaged.
Great, thank you, Zeal. So next, let's move to Mustika. You can introduce yourself and offer your first thoughts on the question.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Mustika Wijaya, Director of Solar Chapter, a non-profit organization in Indonesia. So 26 million people in Indonesia lack access water, clean water, which make up 10% of the population. And then it's also the highest in East Nusa Tenggara, unfortunately. Trips to get clean water can take 2 to 3 hours. Therefore, children need to skip going to school to keep their family healthy. However, it's barely enough for the daily necessities. Unfortunately, the majority of the villagers work as farmers and just waiting for rain to water their crops. So our goal is to holistically develop a region by first providing solar powered pumps to provide a clean water access. By 2021, we've built 5 pumps to serve 6 villages in East Nusa Tenggara, Indonesia. So to answer your question, greatest risk on climate change is, I think, the impact on the water source itself for me. And then I believe that the face of the climate crisis is not only skinny polar bears or melted glaciers, but it's also the injustice, poverty, illiteracy, and also malnutrition in general. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next, let's move to Elvis. Elvis, introduce yourself and offer your first thoughts on the question.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Elvis. Even though my Chinese name is Xiangkun, it's not Elvis. It's easier for everyone. And it's really nice to meet all of you here. And I'm currently an Impact Fellow at MIT Climate and Sustainability Consortium. I'm also a co-founder for C2X. We are this pretty interesting combination between my background and WASH, because I'm trained as a renewable energy engineer. but I work with CO2 emissions, how to convert CO2 emissions into different products. And during my PhD, I find out there is a possibility to convert CO2 emissions into ethanol, which is a key component for sanitizer. So that's the combination for my background as renewable energy engineer with WASH. And I think the greatest challenge regarding climate accessibility is that there's a lack of nexus between technology, business, and policy. Because I believe policy will spur markets, and business is the engine for new actions, and technology is a catalyst for change. But we are running out of time. We really need to facilitate this quick nexus between that so that we can achieve a nexus of climate and WASH. So we definitely need more people with a scientific background to get involved in policymaking directly. And as we have seen during a similar crisis, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, we have Anthony Fauci, who is a scientist, to step up and take roles in policymaking. I believe in order to achieve the nexus between technology, business, and policy, we need more people with scientific background to get involved in this area directly. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Elvis. And so finally, let's go to Bisi. And Bisi, we're very happy to have you. You can probably offer a very holistic perspective on the sector. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marc. Hello, everyone. My name is Bisi Agberemi. I'm a work specialist based in New York with UNICEF. And part of my work actually involves providing technical support and guidance to more than 100 countries all over the world, most of whom are struggling in one way or the other with the impact of the climate crisis. For us, UNICEF is shifting its WASH program to the climate resilient. I mean, that's the mission statement now. And I'm part of the team supporting this shift. Before working in New York, I worked in several UNICEF country offices, including Bangladesh and Nigeria. This has meant that I've been able to witness firsthand the impact of climate change has been on vulnerable communities around the world for many years. Especially when I was in Bangladesh, I was a climate change focal point for the UNICEF country office, where we have face-to-face contact with vulnerable communities being washed away on an annual basis due to flood. Whether it's water wells drying up in Ethiopia, or latrines getting flooded more regularly in Bangladesh, or typhoons becoming more frequent and intense in places such as Philippines, we know that climate change is eating the poorest people hardest and hurting children the most. So it's been happening for a long time now, but it's only recently that the rest of the world is finally started to pay attention. UNICEF recently launched a new report documenting the impact that climate change is having on children around the world. We have developed what is known as the Children's Climate Risk Index, which revealed new global evidence on just how many children are extremely high risk from the impact of climate change in their lifetimes. That figure stands as 1 billion children, 1 billion. That's half of the world's children are impacted by climate. This is a huge number. Our research has shown that one of the best ways to protect these children is to protect the water, sanitary and hygiene services. The report also found that investing in protecting these services will protect the lives of more than 415 million children. But UNICEF and other non-profit organizations cannot do this alone. So that's why we need the help from social innovators like yourselves and the support of academic institutions like Duke and private sectors to help us in developing affordable solutions that can reach the poorest communities and help us tackle the impact of climate on the vulnerable communities. I mean, that's just a background. No, now going straight to your question, I'll give a very, very broad sector overview on the greatest threat to watch, because as I said, this is what we do on a daily basis. For me, it's almost every now and then I get in contact with the information on this. And for us, I think, as said by some of our colleagues here, I think the greatest threat to watch are the destruction of water systems, the toilets and adult facilities due to extreme weather, such as hurricane, flooding, and sea level rise. Hurricanes and flooding destroy water systems unless they are resilient. And that's why for us in UNICEF, we felt that for sustainability, for us to achieve the SDG target and goals, we have to make our water system and services climate resilient. I mean, that's something we have to do. The sea level rise is salinizing water sources, reducing the amount that's fit for human consumption, and significantly damaging and corroding water systems around the world. Climate change creates a major challenge for our water behavior change programs. When there's no water, the toilets are dysfunctional, hand washing facilities cannot be practiced, and a lot of things are really affected. Those are the greatest threats we are seeing on the ground. These are live things we see almost on a daily basis. Also, when people are suffering from the impact of climate change, they are often understandably thinking very little about volunteering to promote good water practices. They are more relying on survival, not to talk about, oh, let's have community services, it's about survival. When communities do not have climate resilient water services, it directly impacts their resilience and ability to withstand climate shocks and recover. Likewise, when communities are not resilient and are impacted by extreme events, they have less resources to invest in water services and less livelihood opportunities. And it's a downward cycle. You see, those that are most affected, they are the poorest of the poor. And the poverty just continues. As I was saying, I had a typical example when I was working in Bangladesh where vulnerable communities are hit by flood every year. As they are recovering, another flood comes, they are swept away. So it's an annual thing and it's so pathetic. So, and that's why I think all hands have to be on deck. All of us have to really come on board to support the idea of having climate water resilience. Let me stop here and hand over to you, Marc. Over to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for those initial thoughts. We heard particularly from Bisi on this last point about extreme events and the cycle that seems like an unending cycle of extreme events. You get hit by one flood and maybe you can recover the first time, but another one hits you right around the corner. These events will become more and more common as climate change worsens. So I'm wondering if the three others have thoughts about how you can improve resilience and reach more people with the technologies that you're promoting, the solutions that you're trying to offer, so that we really can tackle this sort of ever worsening state of affairs, and what you think the most promising approaches are to extend impacts to a larger set of people. Zeal, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think a lot of us are trying to wrap our heads around, right? I think that with the way we are structured, we have climate change as one of our core values or guiding pillars, so to speak. So when we talk about sustainability, especially in the menstruation space or in any space in general, I think they use the term what is called regenerative these days, because sustain means to keep things just the way they are. But I think there needs to be more done in that aspect where we're trying to be more holistic. I think this also leads to the point that Bisi was trying to make, that we're trying to not just be in our silos with this issue, but also by active collaborations and looking at this problem from many different angles. So for instance, in our space in general, we're trying to tackle sustainability, not just from an environmental perspective, but just because of the complexity of the issue, we're also considering all the other angles and all the other factors that will come into effect, especially around health, around economics, and also we're trying to look at something very important here, which is stigma in this space. So we're trying to promote practices, and we're trying to provide options that are good not just for the people that we're serving directly, but also that are good for the planet and even their wallets. The second way we're trying to do this is also by being innovative and promoting use of more innovative products. So for instance, you have the menstrual cup. And there were small pilot studies that an organization called the Cup Effect, they did with refugee camps in Malawi and drought-stricken areas of Kenya. And they showed that these cups were a much better option compared to many other products out there for economically and ecologically displaced populations in the world, because of the fact that they occupy much smaller amount of water, to keep them clean and to use them safely. And if there's enough water to sustain life, there's enough water to use a menstrual cup safely, verbatim, came from the cup effect. So this is and the third point that I would like to make is use of data. Data is education. And we're trying to do that by our menstrual footprint calculator and trying to bring in the whole quantified self aspect of things to this problem, because numbers, they speak louder than words. That's what we believe at Green Periods. So just to wrap it all up, we're trying to use data-driven approach, holistic practices and innovation to make sure that our organizations are more resilient to the effects of climate change.
And maybe just one quick follow-up, because you talked about this menstrual cup. How is that technology made, and how is it then distributed to these displaced populations? Can you tell us a little bit about the model that undergirds that distribution process? Yeah.
Absolutely. We don't manufacture any products, so we want to be inherently unbiased. So I'm just throwing that out there. But the way menstrual cups are made are by an industrial process. So there is medical grade silicone or latex that is being used to manufacture these. And at this point in time, we're at a very interesting phase, because we saw the launch of a $6 menstrual cup here in the US just last year, just around in the throes of the pandemic. So that gives us a lot of hope that these products can be accessible and they last for up to 10 years. So, you have the inherent recurring costs and waste being greatly diminished, like I was mentioning earlier. And then there are companies that are working on social models of buy one, get one, especially when it comes to cups. You have the Ruby Cup, for instance, that is doing that. Organic Cup is another brand that is also doing that. A lot of brands out there are really trying to make a big impact through their social initiatives as well. So, I mean, I would definitely love to keep talking about this. I know, but I would just like to end with the fact that there are many other options for people out there, not just the cups. You have reusable pads, you have menstrual disc, you have reusable tampons, sea sponges. The options are many, and I think that's what needs to be put out there more.
And with many of these technologies, I think so they're great solutions to a problem, right? But are you at all involved with some of the communities themselves and the populations that you're trying to reach in trying to also produce some of them? I mean, maybe in some technologies you need this kind of industrial process behind it, but are some things that could be made locally and also distributed by the population itself, which would perhaps contribute to income generation and their own resilience in different ways? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so we are in the very young kind of initial stages with our initiative. We are actually in the process of incorporating as a nonprofit as we speak. And once we get these logistical hurdles out of the way, we have plans to do a lot more outreach work. So at the moment, as we stand here, we're trying to develop educational curriculum, because we believe that education and outreach are very, very complementary and indispensable in the area that we are in. So they go really hand in hand. So we're just trying to take the next step in the process. But yes, we have big plans to achieve everything you just said.
Great, fantastic. Mustika, you talked about this holistic approach that you're taking in your social enterprise, and maybe you could talk a bit more about this this holistic approach and how you're extending it to reach more people, and some of the limitations of that, because obviously focusing on a holistic approach for one group takes a lot of resources, right? And so you probably have to balance those needs against, this ambition of maybe reaching more people. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the trade-off is probably slower to scaling up, right? Because we want to take the holistic approach. So after we build a solar-powered pump system, then people get 3 hours of their times, right? And then what they're gonna do if we don't help them holistically? So we help the mothers over there to create like a handcraft, and then we also sold those handcrafts outside Indonesia, even United States, Melbourne, and Canada. So, and then in education space, we also build sanitation facilities and also creative rooms, so children that previously get water for 3 hours can use their time more productively here. So I think that's holistic approach that we want to get. But then again, like you said, we also need to limit on the holistic approach that we want to get, because we also want to scale up to other villages that we have. So right now we have 6 villages, and we've built 5 pumps. Also the education and then the community development approach that we did in the village. So basically that.
Yeah, great, thanks. Can you talk a little bit more about, so I'm very interested in this idea of, okay, so you provide some technologies and benefits to people, and then they might save time, maybe kids are studying more. What are some of the complementary interventions that you're coupling with water and sanitation to kind of encourage that use of time for educational purposes or for other useful purposes that would increase resilience in these communities?
So the climate change also affect their agriculture practice, right? And then fun fact that, in fact, that unfortunately the island faced 200 days without rain in 2019, and then the cow even were dead, the cows. So, and then on April there is like this Roja cyclone that killed more than 100 people in that island, and then for us, it's probably only increasing, it's more hotter, right, for them. They don't have food supplies for 1 year even. So it increased poverty and also malnutrition in the island. As you mentioned, people also start to plan like some plantations beside their homes using our water, and then it also increased their income by 113% in average, and then it's also reduced their spending on water. So not only time, but we also can increase the income and also reduce the spending for them. And to make it sustainable, we also educate the villagers to create their own system of water team, right? So then they can manage, and they also conduct a community fund. So this community fund is also for maintenance and also to pay the people that work for the water. So that's how to keep it sustainable for the water systems.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing those efforts. Elvis, let's turn to you. So how, and feel free also to comment on, how you think about this in the energy space, since that's primarily also where you're working. But how, do you think, what are some strategies that are helpful for reaching more people, and particularly these vulnerable populations that we're most concerned about?
Yes, thanks, Marc, for the question, and also recognizing I'm still in a renewable energy sector. And I think there are 2 points I want to make. The first thing is we need to have innovative technical solutions, but having that solutions is not enough. We have to have a mechanism to scale up that solutions. So for example, what we did here, put CO2 into the reactor, and then we convert that into ethanol. So this process is viable scientifically, but how to scale that up to a certain scale that can influence the society. So the devil is really in the details for scale up. So technology you need to have a mechanism to scale that up. And the second point I want to make is, you have the technology, that's good, but we definitely need to have multiple sector collaboration in order to make that more efficient and more impactful. And I would like to draw an example of my current job at MIT. We are the Climate and Sustainability Consortium. So what is unique about this program is we connect people from multiple sectors, from academia, industries, and startups. And we have currently we have 14 member companies, Apple, IBM, Boeing, PepsiCo. So as you can see from the names, they are from totally different industries, but they have shared climate and sustainability missions. I guess for the wash sector, we should be able to achieve similar sense by partnering people who work actively in academia and who are in industry and have existing infrastructure, and also find a mechanism to partner with the startups companies like what our panelists here have. They have their innovative solutions, but how to scale that up, how to make use of the existing infrastructure without having to reinvent the wheels. So that would be the key to success. We would like to have access to the low-hanging fruits, make use of the existing infrastructure and the supply chains so that we can achieve innovation by at the intersection of different sectors. So how to scale up and how to work across disciplines. This, I think, will be the key to success.
Well, and perhaps, that makes the point also that the resilience of these systems is so crucial, right? Because if the supply chain systems or the existing infrastructure fails you, then you're back to square one. So are these big companies that are working as part of this, thinking about that problem and how to make, we're currently in this sort of example of when the supply chain breaks, right? And it's sort of like the natural experiment that's been going on because of, and this is the pandemic, right? But we might expect similar things to happen in the future. What do you know about that? Have you had discussions with these partners about that?
Yeah, definitely. So what is interesting about our program is that we are, so all the projects when we develop, we sit down together with the director of sustainability for the respective companies. And by sitting together, having that dialogue, the program we create. So for example, there might be something that academic people don't care about, but they really have that problem in practice. So this is the first opportunity we can identify. The second opportunity is actually by having people from Boeing and Dole and PepsiCo sitting in the same room, there's going to be some interesting discussion happening. And they might not, they have their own focus in the past, but having that discussion would help them to identify some things that we can do together. Let me just draw a very quick example. You might be a little bit surprised that the sense I'm working on, which is the carbon capture utilization sector, CCUS. So IBM is interested, Dow is interested, and Holcim is also interested. And by putting together different stakeholders and the CCUS startups in the same room, the discussions we have might lead to really interesting implementations, and especially the cross-sector collaboration between them, because IBM is doing pretty good in computational, and PepsiCo is doing good in food manufacturing. But there might be some problems and some potential opportunities they haven't figured out that they can collaborate. So by putting different sectors into the same room, I guess this is a pretty exciting time for all of us.
Well, thanks for that. That's very interesting. So now I want to go back to Bisi, actually. And we've started to talk a little bit about making these systems more resilient to what's coming. And in general, greater resilience is a benefit, even before climate change, because a lot of these communities were already being affected by extreme events every so often and adversely affected. Bisi, can you comment a little bit on what you think needs to happen to make wash products and services more resilient? What are the sort of actions that can be effective? How we should think about resilience? If you know of any examples of systems that have really been improved in terms of their resilience and delivered benefits to people from your work. That would be great to hear about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think the first, let me start from one of our colleagues talking about sustainability. And we need to further unpack that. And of course, I mean, this, everybody is seeing it now. Before, we were pretending as if we don't know what we are talking about. The rich also cry. Now, let me put it that way. Because, I mean, although this impact is the poorest hard, other, but even also, the rich also cry. So I think the message is that all of us have to talk about it. We have to incorporate into all our DNA, whatever we do. We have to plan for it. We have to invest on it. I think to me it's very clear. I mean, the part of what we are seeing, I mean, we've had some series of cyclone here and there. And it was so surprising that when I said the rich, that everybody were all affected one way or the other. So I think it's something we just have to key into seriously. And I think for us, I mean, making what services climate resilient is fundamental to UNICEF. And as I just told you earlier in my previous submission, that we have moved away from just doing business as usual to ensure that all our services are climate resilient, because that's the best way to go. It doesn't make sense you provide services, you say you are supporting this poor community with services, which, I mean, most of our target audience, most of our interventions are actually for the poorest of the poor communities. And okay, you're supporting them with these services, right? This year, you give them fantastic, support them with a lot of stuff. The next year, everything is wiped out. That investment is zero. So what we're saying is just have to be climate resilient for it to be sustainable. That's where I was leading the discussion to. So the sustainability component to be really be in effect, the climate resilience have to be very, very strong in the issue of sustainability. It can never be sustainable, anything we are doing, if we don't incorporate climate resilient principles. And for us, it's because it's even a bigger challenge, right? I mean, let's look at the issue of sanitation, for instance. About 2.8 billion people are still without toilets at home, you know, and most of these people, of course, they are in the least developing countries. They are struggling with a lot of things, you know, even to survive, and yet they are being eaten left and right with impact of climate change. So we have, I mean, if there's a message I'm going to repeat, is we have to ensure that whatever we do, we factor in the issue of climate resilience. And what does that really mean when you say, I mean, we put in climate resilient principles into what we're doing? It shows that right from the planning stage, right, mobilization stage, we incorporate this, we mobilize, we plan for it. What does that mean? It means more investment, right? It means, because I mean, let's take example, night latrine for some, or toilets. For some of us that are used to what we do in the developing world, the toilets could be as cheap as anything, but if you want to make it climate resilient, of course, it becomes a little bit more expensive, right? Already, the average household in the poorest community cannot even afford the basic toilet, but adding climate resilient to it now become more expensive. So how do we support those communities to take this on board with this additional cost? So these are some of the things we do in terms of, number one, for creating the awareness among the communities themselves to say, okay, fine, it's good to have this, but it's better to have this climate resilient so that you don't continue to reconstruct your toilet every year that you have flooding. So that's a lot of work we're doing. We've incorporated all this into our dialogue, we've incorporated all this into our discussions, we've incorporated all this into our plans, and of course, working with other partners. I love the issue of partnership as well. Definitely, it's not just about UNICEF. Of course, we work with governments to deliver services. You don't just go to the community and start doing something. So we work with government to deliver services. So it's part of our orientation, dialogue, and building capacity of government to make sure that they understand why they need more investment in ensuring that we have climate resilient services. And of course, part of the way we've supported them is to come out with guidance as well. I mean, this is what we know how to do well. You know, we don't just talk, we tell them, okay, these are the guidance that you can follow, and these are possible solutions we can follow through a consultative process. And with this, we are able to push or support countries, communities to take this on board and to run with it. So these are some of the few. There's a lot of examples of what we've done globally, from Asia to Africa to Middle East. Of course, as I've said, now our results now have to be climate resilient. So, I mean, let me stop here because I can't continue. I mean, we have several examples, but again, I think, as I've said, we've taken it on board in UNICEF and we are running with it. Over to you, Marc.
Yeah, thanks so much. Very useful thoughts. I was making a list as you were going through of some of the practical options for making these systems more resilient, or these services more resilient for people. And so, one was additional capital expenditure, right? Because you have to have better technology, right, to confront these additional insults and impacts. A second one, which I really like, is this focus on education on risks among beneficiaries, right? Because they may not themselves understand what the climate risks that are coming actually are, or they may not be thinking about them, or have the awareness that the scientific community might have. So providing some education on those risks, which is in and of itself a big challenge, because for people to understand climate risks is not exactly the simplest problem to think about. A third one is this issue of dialoguing with policymakers in a specific area, which is kind of like the policymaker side of that beneficiary education, because policymakers themselves may not also realize what kinds of threats are being imposed on by the systems themselves. I think in the earlier comments, we heard a bit about supply chain resilience and so forth. So that's maybe another one. And then finally, just to draw from an example from my own work, and I think maybe Mustika brought this up as well, the kind of need for maintenance and maintenance services, and communities that can sort of create their own capacities for maintaining systems, because the world is scattered with water and sanitation interventions, where essentially an intervention was put in, but there was not really thought put forward to how that system would be maintained over time. And therefore we see abandonment of those technologies once the system falls apart or breaks down, rather than replacement and rehabilitation of that system. Just drawing on that list, maybe I'll come back to you, Mustika, because you're very deeply involved in the holistic sort of development process in these Indonesian communities. And if any of those solutions are things that you're really pushing, could you tell us a little bit about them, or if you'd like to add to my list?
Yeah, I think it really, the first point really a good point for us, especially because as I mentioned before, there is the recent Seroja cyclone in the island. And then actually one of our pumps got affected, and luckily previously we already think about the prevention if there's a cyclone, so that's why it can be survived, right? It can be rehabilitated. So I think to add more points, I think we need to identifying the risk first. So what is the risk that your systems gonna affected with on the climate change, right? And we need to be prepared of the extreme weather events. For us, it's like from the technical standpoint and also educating the local village, right? Because as you mentioned, like sometimes if we say Mr. or Miss, this in Indonesian it's like Bapak Ibu, are you in the climate crisis? Do you feel the climate effect? They won't say, no, we're doing fine. But then when you ask like, oh, how about the uncertain weather? Oh yeah, today there's no rain, it should be raining. So I think those kind of educational, language that needs to be changed to talk to those types of communities.
Yeah, thank you. Zeal, do you have thoughts on this particular question, how we can make WASH solutions more resilient and how you might be doing that already?
Yeah, I love Miss Mustika's language inclusion. I think that's very important. It's gaining a lot of traction in the menstrual ecosystem as well. So we use the word menstruators, for instance, and not just women or femmes, or even for menstrual products, instead of feminine hygiene products, for instance. So that's definitely one that we really try to be inclusive of all the different populations that experience menstruation in all its different ways and forms. Secondly, stigma is a big issue in our space. So you have these long-standing menstrual taboos that have been passed down over generations and centuries that need to be eradicated when they don't serve the populations. So we're trying to make that a big focus for our educational tools that we will be putting out. And we're trying to make menstruation more inclusive and more relatable and more fact-based, right? And I think data is also one way we're trying to tackle that. And then just providing the different kinds of options that are out there, because not enough is being said about all the different kinds of products that are coming out that are innovative, and some that have been kind of just buried under the rug, that people had already invented in the past because of the way the big multinationals have come up with their marketing campaigning around disposable products. So we're trying to break a lot of myths when it comes to the education. And of course, what better way than to collaborate with different stakeholders when we're trying to include governments, the public, private sector, even educational institutions. So bringing that holistic component back into the equation. And then lastly, by outreach and gaining meaningful feedback from that outreach and making sure that the education and the practices, the new practices, so to speak, are being retained in an effective manner.
Yeah, I really like this emphasis on beneficiaries' choices and their, actually respecting their own choices, because, our solutions, or, the multinational solutions may not be their solutions, right? And so allowing people to act on those preferences and their own choices is pretty critical. And this idea of also gathering feedback from the users to, potentially learn to make better products or learn, what works for what type of population better, so that can inform targeting and so forth. So thanks for those thoughts and impressions. Elvis, back to you. What would you say in terms of making these systems more resilient? What are the key sort of things that you think are most important and vital?
Sure. I guess Mustika and Zeal both point out very important thing, which is education and communication. I think similar to WASH in climate, there has been a lack of communication, and especially during the past few years when the other guy was there. So I feel we need better public communication, and there's still many people who don't believe climate change is happening. But real data is showing, for example, let me just draw a data. The year I was born was 1991. And the month I was born, the CO2 concentration was 350 parts per million, which is ppm. And today, just earlier this month, this number has already reached 413 ppm. So these are the facts that we need to illustrate to the public. And so better public engagement will lead to policy engagement. And as I illustrated earlier, better policies with a backward to support these technologies and business and the market. So we really need to create a campaign for social engagement to engage the public and the policymakers. Because technologies, they are pretty cool, but we need money, we need funding to make sure that approaches can be translated to have some real world impact. So back to my original point, we need a nexus between the education and the climate, the technology, the business, and the education is definitely a key component, which is something missing, but this is a low-hanging fruit that we can tackle right now.
Thanks a lot. All right, so I've got one final question, and then I'll encourage the audience to put questions in the Q&A or in the chat, as we've been seeing. I think, that we'd be eager to hear from you. But I'll start this one also with Bisi. And specifically, we've heard about these potential solutions that create more resilient wash services and systems. But in many ways, all of these solutions are hardest to implement among the most vulnerable populations and the hardest people to reach. So I'd be curious to hear, how is UNICEF trying to think about ways of really addressing that population? Even something like, education and communication, it's often hardest to reach the lowest income populations who may have less education, less access to information in the first place, or may be distrustful of some sources of information. And similarly, if we're talking about expensive solutions, so more capital, infrastructure, and expense, those are the solutions that are hardest for the poor to adopt. So how can we provide them in a way that allows access to be equitable and broadly based? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. For us in UNICEF, as I said earlier, we are present on the ground to start with, and we work with governments. And one of the things we do is we support government. We enhance the capacity. We strengthen systems to deliver services. The governments are primary duty bearers. Right? So one of those things we do at country office level, we are present in over 100 countries doing WASH, by the way. So is to make sure that we enhance the capacity of governments themselves to strengthen the systems for delivery of services. That is their primary duty. So we are not there to substitute government. So having said that, so it involves a lot of things, right? In terms of planning, communication, and some other stuff. And I love the submission about other colleagues talking about communication. Communication is very powerful. What are we communicating? And that's the next question. And again, it's linked to what Zeal said about data. I have it here too. So for us too, and in my introductory remarks, I talk about report evidence. So one of the things we've been doing very well is the issue of trying to generate evidence. You see, because we have to communicate something, you have to convince people, right? So we've been deeply involved in evidence generation on the impact of climate change, especially on children who are primary audience, right? Of course, by default, to do community, that's a way of further having a more robust evidence-based communication and to convince everybody that this is needed. That is one of the work we've been doing. And so the issue of evidence and data is actually very important. Likewise, too, for us, irrespective of whether it's climate resilient or not, it's about equity. So these are principles we work with. That is making sure that everybody is reached with services, irrespective of wherever you are based, wherever you are. Our effort is to ensure that everybody have access to service. So we talk about equity. So this is one of the areas we've been promoting, we've been supporting government to ensure that we have equitable services. Then we talk about, you're right, being climate resilient is expensive. It is. And that's one of the areas, let me use the word we are struggling with. That's why the issue of two things come into place is innovative solutions. And this is probably where you guys could be of help, of course, because you are social entrepreneurs, right? We've all decided that this is the way to go, right? It's expensive, but we could come out with innovative, affordable, climate resilient solutions that can address the need of the poorest of the poor, right? And that's why I think this type of platform, talking to social entrepreneurs, try to catalyze, encourage, motivate them to go deep down to come up with solutions that can be affordable by these already poor communities, and at the same time addressing the impact of climate change. So I think that's actually one of those things we are doing. Then we talk about financing. It's expensive, right? So we have to look for finance. We have climate financing, we have innovation, and we have innovative climate financing. We have a lot of funds outside there. How do we access it? Yeah, especially for WASH. Because if you, sorry, I don't have the figures on top of my head here, but if you look at those climate funds that are available, the percent that goes to WASH is very minimal, right? WASH, sanitation is almost zero. Water, a little bit. sanitation almost zero, not talk of ideal promotion and all those rest. So how do we access the finance, the climate funds to further enhance what we are doing, right? And that's where the issue, if I'm to wrap up, that's where the issue of evidence generation, to make evidence-based advocacy and communication to convince that, yes, this is the way to go. We need funds, and you guys, please give us more funds to go that way. And that is what UNICEF has been doing to make sure that the most vulnerable populations are reached with climate resilient service. We still have, let me confess, we still have a long way to go. I will confess, we still have a long way to go. I said we have 2.8 billion people not having access to sanitation. They are just sanitation. If this population are to be reached, then a lot of funds are required. So we have to really come together from all angles, partners, academicians, private sectors. Everybody has to quickly come on board and see what we put together, right, to support this cause, towards the good cause we think we are pursuing. And we feel that this is a cause that will actually lead us to sustainable wash development. So let me stop here. And but yeah, I think that's the way to go. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much. Over to you, Marc.
Yeah, thanks so much. Very useful thoughts and challenges for the entrepreneurs also, that you need to innovate more, which is what you're trying to do. But keep up the good work and we'll make progress. I want to give each of the other panelists, Zeal, Mustika, Elvis, a chance for one last intervention if you'd like to respond to Bisi in any way in 30 seconds or less. Zeal, anything else to say?
That's a tough one. I took notes, Bisi. That was amazing. I think that the convincing part, I was just nodding my head a lot. I love that, and the evidence-based information and data. I think that it's a hard one to convince, and that's why we're here. I think that's our main job, is to convince people that this is happening, this is real, and we need to act now.
Thank you. Mustika, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think Bisi already summarized pretty well. The problem is, I think, not only the innovation itself, right? We have a lot of innovation, but to distribute, to make sure that it's based on the market needs, to be localized, that they can have sense of belonging to use. I think that's actually the hardest part for me. So for us, I think we're just using the current technologies and distributing the technologies, and it's already like pretty hard, and just need commitment to do that.
Great, thanks. Elvis?
Yeah, I think I will end by saying the clock is ticking for urgent actions. And we have seen the greater effect, hence showing youth action can make a great impact. But even more meaningful, climate actions and wash actions by youth, of youth and for youth are needed more than ever. Because eventually it's going to be us, the young people, who have to live with the consequences. So the clock is ticking, we need to act now.
Thank you. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thanks so much for your contributions. This was a really interesting discussion and conversation. I've learned a lot. I appreciate all of your interventions. And thanks to the audience also for bearing with us and sending in some comments as well. We'll close there. And thanks for the participation.